Sasha Obama stood firmly in the bustling Reagan National Airport, her heart pounding as airline staff and TSA agents surrounded her. "Miss Obama," one of the agents barked, holding up her boarding pass, "there are some issues with your ticket." Sasha's eyes widened in disbelief. "What do you mean?" she demanded, her voice steady despite the rising panic inside her. The manager stepped forward, her expression cold. "We're sorry, but we can't allow you to board this flight." The crowd around them began to murmur, sensing the tension. Sasha felt a surge of anger and humiliation wash over her. "This is unacceptable," she declared, refusing to back down. The agents exchanged uneasy glances, the air thick with confrontation. "Please let me board," Sasha insisted, her determination unwavering. The manager shook her head firmly. "We have protocols to follow," she replied, her tone final. Sasha clenched her fists, her mind racing for a solution. The situation was escalating rapidly, and Sasha knew she couldn't handle this alone. Just moments before this confrontation, Sasha had been preparing for her day with a mix of excitement and nervousness. The early morning sun had cast a golden glow over Washington, D.C. as she adjusted her backpack, her mind focused on the prestigious youth conference in New York City. Her father, Barack Obama, had given her a heartfelt pep talk the night before. "Remember, you're there because of your hard work and dedication. Nobody can take that from you," he had said, his words resonating deeply within her. Determined to carve out her own identity apart from her famous family, Sasha had meticulously rehearsed her presentation, hoping to make a meaningful impact. As she checked her phone for the time, just past 6:30 a.m., she felt a surge of anticipation. This was her moment to shine, to share her research and ideas with other bright young minds. Little did she know, the journey ahead would test her resilience in ways she never imagined. Sasha stepped into Reagan National Airport, the terminal alive with the chaos of early morning travelers. The roar of rolling suitcases, the cacophony of announcements, and the scent of freshly brewed coffee filled the air. She navigated through the crowded space, her slender frame allowing her to slip between groups of hurried passengers. Clutching her ticket and ID tightly, she approached the check-in counter, her mind focused on the presentation ahead. The noise around her seemed to fade as she concentrated on reaching her gate on time. Despite the bustling environment, Sasha felt a slight anxiety gnawing at her, a prelude to the challenges that awaited her. Her determination to stay composed was palpable, even as the initial tension began to build. At the check-in counter, Sasha placed her documents on the counter with a polite but brisk, "Good morning." The woman behind the desk, M. Reynolds, barely glanced up, her eyes scanning Sasha's face and then her ticket. "Yes?" Reynolds asked, her tone neutral but clipped. "Business class," Sasha replied confidently, expecting a routine check. Reynolds raised an eyebrow, holding up the ticket as if inspecting it for authenticity. The silence stretched uncomfortably between them. "Are you sure this is your ticket?" Reynolds asked, her voice tinged with skepticism. Sasha blinked, taken aback by the unexpected scrutiny. "Yes, of course. Is there a problem?" she responded, her patience beginning to wear thin. Reynolds scanned the ticket again, then glanced through her computer screen. "We don't usually see passengers like—" She paused, realizing she had said too much. "Never mind," she said, flipping through her screen. "Just making sure everything's in order." Sasha felt a flicker of irritation but chose to brush it off. She wasn't about to let a rude employee ruin her morning. However, her composure was short-lived. Reynolds called over another agent, whispering something while pointing in Sasha's direction. The flicker of irritation ignited into a small flame of anger. The second agent, a stern-faced man, approached and scrutinized Sasha's ID with exaggerated care. "This ticket is for business class," he said, his tone laden with suspicion. "I know," Sasha replied, her voice steady but firm. "It's my ticket." The man exchanged a look with Reynolds before nodding reluctantly. "Fine, go ahead," he muttered, waving her through with a dismissive gesture. Sasha grabbed her ticket and ID, her jaw clenched as she moved toward the security checkpoint. She could feel eyes on her, passengers glancing curiously but saying nothing. Her father's advice echoed in her mind. "Don't let anyone make you feel less than you are." She took a deep breath, steadying herself for the next step. As Sasha approached the security checkpoint, the line was long but orderly. TSA agents barked instructions, and travelers shuffled forward in small bursts. She placed her backpack on the conveyor belt and stepped through the metal detector without incident. Reaching for her bag on the other side, a TSA agent blocked her path. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said, his tone suggesting something was wrong. "We need to perform a secondary screening." Sasha frowned, glancing at the conveyor belt where her bag sat untouched. "Why is there a problem?" she asked. "It's just a random check," the agent replied, gesturing toward a separate area cordoned off by retractable barriers. "This way, please." Frustration mounting, Sasha complied, though her irritation was evident. The secondary screening involved an invasive pat-down, a thorough rummaging through her bag, and repeated questions about the purpose of her trip. "Who bought your ticket?" the agent asked, holding up her boarding pass. "I did," Sasha replied, her voice clipped. "It's for a conference." The agent smirked. "Pretty fancy conference if you're flying business class," he remarked, his face flushing with indignation. Sasha bit her tongue, knowing better than to escalate the situation. "This is harassment," she snapped, pushing back against the invasive procedures. The agent exchanged a glance with his colleague before stepping back. "You're good to go," he said perfunctorily, handing back her belongings. Sasha returned to the main terminal, her composure shaken but intact. She checked her watch and realized she had less than an hour before her flight, picking up her pace as she headed toward her gate. Determined not to let the morning's events distract her, she pushed forward. But as she neared the gate, she saw a cluster of airline staff whispering and pointing in her direction. A middle-aged woman with a stern demeanor approached her. "Miss, I need to see your ticket and ID again," the woman said, her tone devoid of courtesy. Sasha handed over her documents, her patience wearing thin. The woman inspected them before saying, "We've been informed there may be an issue with your ticket. Please come with me." "What kind of issue?" Sasha demanded, her voice rising. "Just a routine verification," the woman replied, already walking toward a side corridor. Sasha hesitated, her instincts telling her something was off, but she followed. Her heart pounded as she entered the corridor, realizing it led away from the gate area. The woman stopped abruptly and turned to face her. "I'm sorry, but we can't allow you to board this flight," she said coldly. "You'll need to leave the airport." Sasha stared at her, stunned. "What? Why?" she asked, fury surging through her. "We have our reasons," the woman shrugged. "If you don't leave willingly, we'll have security escort you out." Sasha clenched her fists, her mind racing. Humiliation was rising, her eyes stinging with unshed tears, but she refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. Pulling out her phone, she called the one person she knew could make things right. "Dad," she said, her voice trembling, "I need you." The call ended with a calm, steady reply from the other end. "I'm on my way." But for Sasha Obama, those words weren't enough to quell the storm brewing inside her. Sasha took a deep breath, steeling herself as she proceeded toward the security checkpoint. The long line seemed interminable, and her frustration was mounting with each passing second. Despite the chaos around her, she focused on maintaining her composure, recalling her father's advice to remain strong and not let anyone diminish her sense of self-worth. The steady hum of conversations, the clatter of suitcases, and the distant overhead announcements provided a constant backdrop to her internal turmoil. She placed her backpack on the conveyor belt and stepped through the metal detector, feeling a slight tension in her muscles. Nothing triggered, she reached for her bag on the other side, only to be met by a stern-looking TSA agent blocking her path. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said, his tone firm, yet devoid of warmth. "We need to perform a secondary screening." Sasha frowned, glancing at the conveyor belt where her bag lay untouched. "Why is there a problem?" she asked, her voice tinged with irritation. "It's just a random check," the agent replied, his gesture directing her toward a separate area marked by retractable barriers. "This way, please." Her frustration was mounting, but Sasha knew she had to stay composed. The secondary screening would involve invasive pat-downs, thorough bag searches, and repeated questioning about her trip. She felt a wave of humiliation wash over her but pushed it aside, focusing instead on her goal. "Who bought your ticket?" the agent demanded, holding up her boarding pass. "I did," Sasha replied, her voice clipped yet steady. "It's for a conference." The agent smirked. a hint of condescension in his eyes. "Pretty fancy conference if you're flying business class," he remarked, his tone dripping with suspicion. Sasha's face flushed with indignation, but she bit her tongue, knowing that escalating the situation further would only make things worse. "This is harassment," she snapped, her frustration barely contained. The agent exchanged a glance with his colleague, their expressions unreadable. "You're good to go," he said perfunctorily, handing back her belongings. Sasha felt a flicker of relief but remained on edge, knowing that the situation was far from over. She returned to the main terminal, her composure shaken but intact. Checking her watch, she realized she had less than an hour before her flight. Picking up her pace, she headed toward her gate, determined not to let the morning's events distract her. As she neared the gate, she noticed a cluster of airline staff whispering and pointing in her direction. A middle-aged woman with a stern demeanor approached her face devoid of any semblance of courtesy. "Miss, I need to see your ticket and ID again," she stated flatly. Sasha handed over her documents, her patience wearing thin. The woman inspected them meticulously before saying, "We've been informed there may be an issue with your ticket. Please come with me." "What kind of issue?" Sasha demanded, her voice rising in frustration. "Just a routine verification," the woman replied, already walking toward a side corridor. Sasha hesitated, sensing something was amiss, but she followed, her heart pounding in her chest. The corridor was eerily quiet compared to the bustling main terminal, the atmosphere tense and foreboding. The woman stopped abruptly and turned to face her. "I'm sorry, but we can't allow you to board this flight," she said coldly. "You'll need to leave the airport." Sasha stared at her, stunned and disbelieving. "What? Why?" she demanded, fury surging through her. "We have our reasons," the woman shrugged. "If you don't leave willingly, we'll have security escort you out." Sasha clenched her fists, her mind racing with confusion and indignation. She could feel the humiliation rising, her eyes stinging with unshed tears. But she refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. Pulling out her phone, she dialed the one person she knew could help. "Dad," she said, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and desperation. "I need you." The call connected, and her father's calm, steady voice responded. "I'm on my way," he assured her. But for Sasha Obama, those words weren't enough to quell the storm brewing inside her. Sasha stood alone in the shadow of the quiet corridor, her heart pounding as she waited for her father's arrival. The weight of humiliation pressed down on her, each moment stretching into an eternity. She clutched her bag tightly, her fingers trembling with a mix of fear and anger. The bustling terminal seemed a distant reality, the silence of the corridor amplifying her distress. "Dad," she whispered into the phone, her voice barely audible over the thudding of her own heartbeat. "I need you." The call ended, leaving her in a state of anxious anticipation. The minutes felt like hours as she paced the narrow corridor, her mind racing with thoughts of what might happen next. The agents and staff outside the corridor seemed indifferent to her plight, their stern expressions offering no comfort. Sasha took a deep breath, trying to steady herself, but the urgency of the situation was overwhelming. She knew her father would come, but the uncertainty of the outcome left her feeling vulnerable and exposed. Within minutes, the sound of approaching footsteps reached Sasha's ears, growing louder with each passing second. She looked up to see her father, Barack Obama, striding confidently toward her. His presence was magnetic, exuding a calm assurance that immediately put Sasha at ease. The former president's expression was one of composed determination, his eyes scanning the scene with a mix of concern and authority. As he approached, the security guards and remaining agents straightened up instinctively, their postures stiffening under his gaze. The manager who had confronted Sasha earlier halted her speech, momentarily adjusting her posture and forcing an uneasy smile. Sasha felt a surge of relief wash over her as her father reached her side. "Miss Obama," he began, his voice measured and authoritative. "Are you all right?" Sasha nodded, though her voice caught as she tried to reply. "They were going to kick me out of the airport," she explained, her frustration evident. Barack's gaze shifted to the manager, his expression unreadable yet heavy with expectation. "Is that true?" he asked, his tone polite but firm. The manager hesitated, glancing between Sasha and Barack, seeking support from the TSA agents behind her. "Sir, we had concerns regarding her behavior," she began, her voice tinged with defensive irritation. She was becoming disruptive, and we have protocols in place for situations like this. Barack raised an eyebrow, his calm exterior betraying a subtle sharpness in his tone. Can you explain exactly how my daughter was being disruptive? He demanded. The manager opened her mouth to respond, but a male TSA agent interrupted her, his voice brimming with misplaced confidence. She refused to comply with our security procedures. We were just doing our job, Sasha interjected, her voice trembling with anger. I complied with everything you asked. You treated me like a criminal for no reason, and when I pushed back against the harassment, you decided to call it disruption. The male agent's jaw tightened, but he remained silent, while the manager seemed to shrink slightly under the weight of Sasha's words. Barack's gaze swept over the group, his expression hardening. It seems to me that there's been a serious misunderstanding, he stated firmly. My daughter is not leaving this airport unless she decides to. He turned to the manager. I expect a detailed explanation of why she was singled out in the first place. The manager cleared her throat, her voice shaking slightly. We have protocols, sir. Her ticket was flagged, and we followed up accordingly. Barack's voice edged with impatience. Flagged for what? He pressed. The woman faltered, her face reddening as the male TSA agent crossed his arms and spoke again. Sometimes we have to make judgment calls, especially when something doesn't feel right. Barack repeated, his voice dropping slightly. You made a judgment call based on how my daughter looks, didn't you? The tension in the corridor was almost suffocating as the female TSA agent glanced nervously at her colleague, who avoided her gaze. I assure you, sir, we don't tolerate discrimination in this airport, the manager began, her voice shaking. That's an admirable policy. Barack responded coolly, policies are only as good as their enforcement. From where I'm standing, this entire situation reeks of bias. Barack's assertion hung heavily in the air, the room silent except for the distant sounds of the bustling terminal. The security guards straightened their postures, their expressions shifting from detached indifference to wary focus. The manager's composure began to falter under Barack's unwavering authority. My daughter is standing here humiliated and distressed because your team decided she didn't belong in business class, he continued, his voice steady but carrying an undeniable authority. Is that not true? The silence that followed was deafening, a tacit admission of guilt hanging between them. Barack exhaled slowly, the sound heavy with disappointment. He turned to Sasha, his expression softening slightly. Are you ready to go? He asked gently. Sasha nodded, clutching her bag tightly, ready to leave the nightmare behind her. But a part of her bristled at the idea of letting the staff off the hook. The manager stammered, Wait, sir, perhaps we can discuss this further. Barack paused, turning his back to the group. You'll be hearing from me, he said, his voice low and steady, and I suggest you prepare yourselves for a thorough review of your so-called protocols. Without another word, he placed a reassuring hand on Sasha's shoulder and guided her back toward the main terminal corridor. Behind them, the room remained unnervingly quiet, the weight of their departure hanging heavy in the air. As they walked, Sasha felt a mixture of relief and lingering frustration. She glanced at her father, searching his face for some sign of true emotion, but his expression remained calm, his focus fixed straight ahead. Dad, she began hesitantly, I'm sorry you had to come down here. I didn't know what else to do. Barack stopped and turned to face her, his hands resting gently on her shoulders. Sasha, you don't have to apologize for standing up for yourself. What happened here today is unacceptable, he said firmly, his words soothing some of the tension coiled in her chest. But the sting of the morning's events still lingers, Sasha admitted quietly, her voice thick with emotion. They treated me like I didn't belong, she added softly. I know, Barack replied, his tone heavy with a mixture of anger and sadness. And they're going to answer for it. As Barack and Sasha walked back toward the main terminal, the buzz of airport life gradually filled the silence between them. Announcements blared overhead, passengers hurried to their gates, and the world moved on as if nothing had happened. But for Sasha, time seemed to stand still, each second stretching into an eternity as she processed the events of the past half hour. Barack's intervention had bought Sasha a temporary reprieve. As they approached the gate, the airline staff began to relax, allowing Sasha to proceed to her flight. Have a great flight, Mr. Obama, the young gate agent said, his nervous smile betraying his previous stern demeanor. Barack offered a curt nod, his focus unwavering as they walked down the jet bridge. Sasha couldn't help but release a breath she hadn't realized she was holding, feeling the glimmer of relief for the first time that morning. The tension began to ease, but the weight of the morning's events still lingered in her mind. As they settled into their seats, Sasha felt a mixture of exhaustion and gratitude. She had managed to overcome the immediate conflict, but she knew the repercussions were just beginning. News of the incident spread like wildfire. By the next morning, major news outlets had picked up the story, their headlines stark and accusatory. Sasha Obama targets airport discrimination scandal, former president demands accountability for TSA misconduct, and bias at the gates, a call for change. Public response was swift and polarized. Supporters flooded social media with messages of solidarity, praising Sasha for standing up against injustice. Hashtags like #Justice for Sasha and #End Airport Bias began trending, amplifying her voice and bringing attention to systemic issues within the TSA. Critics, however, accused the Obamas of overreacting, suggesting that the agents were simply doing their jobs and that the incident was being blown out of proportion. Online debates raged, with both sides passionately defending their perspectives. The incident struck a nerve, sparking broader conversations about bias and discrimination in everyday interactions. The media coverage ensured that the story remained in the public eye, maintaining the momentum needed to drive meaningful change. The immediate fallout within the TSA and the airline was significant. The agents involved in Sasha's case were suspended pending further investigation, their actions scrutinized under the intense media spotlight. Internal reviews were launched to assess the protocols that had allowed such discrimination to occur. The TSA faced mounting pressure to address the systemic issues highlighted by the incident, leading to calls for comprehensive reforms. Barack Obama, leveraging his influence, demanded accountability and transparency, insisting that mere suspensions were not enough. The airline issued a formal apology, acknowledging the distress caused to Sasha and vowing to implement changes to prevent future occurrences. However, the public remained skeptical, eager to see tangible actions rather than just verbal assurances. The incident served as a catalyst, bringing to light the pervasive biases that needed to be addressed within the aviation security framework. Determined to turn her painful experience into a force for good, Sasha Obama began speaking out publicly about the incident. She shared her story through interviews, speeches, and social media, highlighting the broader issues of bias and discrimination within the TSA. Her candid and powerful words resonated with many, inspiring others to come forward with their own experiences. Sasha emphasized the importance of accountability and the need for systemic change, urging the public to demand better treatment for all passengers, regardless of their background or appearance. She collaborated with advocacy groups and policymakers, using her platform to amplify the voices of those who had been silenced. Her advocacy was relentless, driven by a deep-seated desire to prevent others from enduring the same humiliation and injustice she had faced. The support from the public grew, with many rallying behind her cause, further fueling the push for meaningful reforms within the transportation industry. Under the immense pressure from public outcry and advocacy efforts led by Sasha and Barack Obama, significant policy reforms were initiated within the TSA and the airline. Mandatory bias training became a cornerstone of employee development, aimed at challenging stereotypes and promoting empathy among staff. An independent oversight committee was established to handle complaints and ensure accountability, providing a transparent mechanism for addressing misconduct. Additionally, new reporting hotlines were introduced, allowing passengers to voice their concerns directly and securely. These measures were designed to prevent the recurrence of incidents like Sasha's, fostering a more inclusive and respectful environment for all travelers. While some welcomed the changes as a step toward equity, others remained skeptical, questioning the effectiveness of the reforms and the commitment of the institutions to implement them fully. Nevertheless, the introduction of these policies marked a significant shift, addressing the systemic issues that had long plagued the aviation security sector. The implementation of the new policies sparked a range of reactions from both the public and institutions. Many praised the TSA and the airline for taking concrete steps to address bias and improve accountability, viewing the reforms as essential for fostering trust and respect within the aviation industry. Activists and advocacy groups lauded the efforts, citing them as a model for other sectors grappling with similar issues. However, there were also voices of skepticism and resistance. Some employees within the TSA expressed concerns about the mandatory training, fearing it might infringe on their professional judgment or create additional burdens. Critics argued that the reforms, while well-intentioned, were insufficient without ongoing oversight and a genuine cultural shift within the organization. Public opinion remained divided, with ongoing debates about the depth and effectiveness of the changes. Despite the mixed reactions, the conversation about bias and discrimination remained at the forefront, ensuring that the reforms continued to be scrutinized and refined over time. Sasha and Barack Obama did not rest on their laurels after the initial reforms were implemented. Recognizing that true systemic change required sustained effort, they continued their advocacy, pushing for deeper and more comprehensive reforms within the TSA and beyond. They organized conferences and forums, bringing together experts, activists, and policymakers to discuss and address the root causes of bias and discrimination in security procedures. Sasha expanded her outreach, mentoring young advocates and empowering them to use their voices to affect change. Barack leveraged his connections in Washington, D.C., working tirelessly to influence legislation aimed at dismantling the systemic barriers that allowed discrimination to persist. Their efforts extended beyond the aviation industry, touching on issues in policing, education, and healthcare, advocating for a broader societal shift toward equality and justice. The Obama's relentless pursuit of change inspired countless individuals to join the fight, creating a ripple effect that transcended the original incident. Their commitment underscored the importance of perseverance and unity in overcoming entrenched prejudices, reinforcing the belief that collective action could drive meaningful and lasting transformation. As the months passed, Sasha took time to reflect on her journey. The incident at Reagan National Airport had been a painful reminder of the pervasive biases that still existed in society, but it had also been a catalyst for her personal growth. She recognized the strength and resilience she had discovered within herself, qualities that had been honed through adversity. The experience taught her the importance of standing up for what is right. Even in the face of overwhelming opposition, Sasha felt a renewed sense of purpose, driven by the desire to make a tangible difference in the world. Her reflections deepened her commitment to advocacy, reinforcing her belief that one person's voice could indeed spark widespread change. This internal journey of resilience and self-discovery became the foundation for her continued efforts to combat discrimination and promote equality. Sasha's impactful speeches at national conferences and public events became a cornerstone of her advocacy work. She stood confidently before large audiences, sharing her story with clarity and passion. Her words were powerful, describing the invasive scrutiny and unfair treatment she had endured, and emphasizing the broader implications of such actions on society as a whole. The audience was captivated, moved by her sincerity and determination. Her speeches inspired many to take action, whether by supporting policy reforms, sharing their own experiences, or advocating for change within their communities. Media coverage of her public appearances further amplified her message, reaching an even wider audience. Sasha's ability to articulate the emotional and societal impacts of bias and discrimination made her a respected and influential figure in the fight for justice and equality. Sasha's commitment to justice and equality remained unwavering. She continued to use her platform to highlight issues of bias and discrimination, collaborating with various organizations to implement effective solutions. Sasha worked closely with policymakers to develop and promote legislation aimed at preventing discriminatory practices in all sectors. She also engaged with community leaders and activists, fostering a network of support and collaboration that extended far beyond the aviation industry. Sasha understood that the fight for equality was ongoing and multifaceted, requiring persistent effort and collective action. Her dedication inspired others to join the cause, creating a movement that sought to dismantle systemic barriers and promote a more inclusive and just society. Through her tireless advocacy, Sasha demonstrated the profound impact that one individual can have in driving meaningful and lasting change. The incident at Reagan National Airport marked a pivotal moment in Sasha Obama's life and advocacy journey, What began as a humiliating and unjust confrontation evolved into a powerful catalyst for change, highlighting the deep-seated biases within the TSA in the broader transportation industry. Barack Obama's decisive intervention not only resolved the immediate conflict, but also set the stage for significant policy reforms aimed at combating discrimination and promoting accountability. The media coverage and public response amplified the urgency of addressing systemic issues, leading to the implementation of mandatory bias training, independent oversight committees, and new reporting mechanisms within the TSA. Sasha's relentless advocacy further propelled the movement, inspiring countless individuals to speak out against injustice and demand equitable treatment for all. The combined efforts of the Obamas and the public sparked a nationwide conversation about bias and discrimination, underscoring the importance of resilience, advocacy, and collective action in driving societal transformation. Sasha Obama's journey through adversity and her unwavering commitment to justice serve as a powerful reminder of the importance of standing up against injustice. Her story underscores the profound impact that one person can have in challenging systemic biases and promoting meaningful change. As viewers reflect on her experiences, they are encouraged to recognize their own power to advocate for equality and fairness in their communities. The fight against discrimination is ongoing, and it requires the collective efforts of individuals, organizations, and institutions to create a more just and inclusive society. Sasha's resilience and determination inspire us all to use our voices, take action, and support one another in the pursuit of a better future. Let her story be a call to action for each of us to challenge prejudice, uphold justice, and work tirelessly to ensure that everyone is treated with the dignity and respect they deserve. Together, we can make a difference and drive the change necessary to build a more equitable world. This narrative is a fictional account inspired by real-life figures and events. All characters, including Sasha Obama and Barack Obama, are depicted in scenarios created for the purpose of this story. Any resemblance to actual persons or events is purely coincidental. The details provided are intended to highlight issues of bias and discrimination within institutional settings, emphasizing the importance of accountability and systemic reform. This script aims to inspire discussions around social justice, equality, and the power of advocacy in effecting meaningful change. Special thanks to all those who advocate for justice and equality, providing inspiration and strength to individuals like Sasha Obama. Your tireless efforts in challenging systemic biases and promoting inclusive policies are commendable and essential for creating a fairer society. This story is dedicated to the resilience and courage of those who stand up against injustice, using their voices to drive positive change. Your commitment to fighting discrimination and supporting one another is the foundation upon which a more equitable world is built.